As the current energy crisis worsens, our financial stability is threatened. Gas shortages will cause families to freeze during a heatless winter. Blackouts are becoming the norm, and energy rationing is taking place. This certainly doesn't reflect our modern era. In fact, the truth is, we're behind in energy technologies, but not because of a lack of ability or knowledge. No, this was intentional and orchestrated over the past 100 years by those who had the power to suppress and redact information as they see fit, to keep us in the dark. Welcome to Redacted History. I'm Clayton Morris. Well, there's no denying it. We're in a man-made energy crisis, ultimately designed over the decades by power-hungry governments, wealthy politicians, special interest groups, big oil, and greedy energy companies that are making record profits, billions off of our fossil fuel reliance, while the general public suffers the consequences of what decisions were made for them, self-serving decisions that were not in the best interest of the people. It didn't have to be this way, though. Things most certainly could have been done differently by embracing alternative energy sources 100 years ago. Now, you may be thinking, wait a second, we're actually embracing alternative energy sources right now. We're working hard to implement solar technology, wind turbines, other non-fossil fuel energy alternatives, as well as a big push for electric car use. But it just takes time to get a solid system in place, right? Yes, that's true. We are working to implement these alternative energy sources, but the data shows us that renewables only account for 3% of output of energy. And all of that solar and wind need to be backed up by natural gas and hydrocarbons. So the solar wind scam might just be nothing more than that, a scam, a lie. But what if there was something else out there? Not nuclear, which is currently the best form of clean energy, not oil, not solar, something else you've never heard of before. So this is where the truth unfolds for those who are unaware of our history as it relates to energy discoveries. And this may come as a shock to you, but various technologies for free non-fossil fuel energy sources were actually being developed well over 100 years ago. For instance, something called etheric energy was discovered, and the technology to capture it and convert it into usable power was developed over 4 decades ago. Never heard of it? Well, you're not supposed to. So what is etheric energy? Well, in its basic form, it's energy that nature provides that can be extracted from the atmosphere, the air all around us, and has the ability to be converted into usable forms of energy. Along with this, at the same time, wireless transmission of electricity that's directed through the atmosphere and utilizes the Earth's electric force as a conductor was being researched and tested, with the end result being light bulbs wirelessly illuminated 25 to 26 miles away from the power source. Think about this. No power lines. Light bulbs 25 miles away from the power source turning on. This was an incredible advancement in energy technology that was way before its time. What may surprise you even more is the fact that the beginnings of electric car technology came into existence in 1839. Electric-powered cars were in development and put into use in the mid to late 1800s. There are even images of fleets of electric cars plugged in and charging. Electric cars were so popular that President Woodrow Wilson owned one, loved it, and drove it all around Washington, D.C. The batteries in these cars used salt, much different than the current lithium-ion technology. Other alternative energy developments at the time included a wind turbine that was built in 1888 that proceeded to power a house successfully for the next 20 years. And if that wasn't enough, the first U.S. solar panels were installed on a rooftop in New York in 1884. Yeah, that's worth repeating. Solar panels installed on a rooftop 138 years ago. Okay, so knowing that all of these alternative energy ideas were discovered and in existence over a century ago, you can even imagine how advanced these technologies would be today if they were allowed to progress, unfettered, consistently perfected year after year over the course of those 100 years. The bottom line is that these renewable energy technologies were pushed out of the limelight for decades, hidden from all of us. Dare I say, redacted. I mean, does anyone remember reading about solar panels in school back in the day? Because I don't. I do recall reading volumes of information on coal, gas, and oil, though. Why were we not aggressively building upon these various renewable energy sources all along? Could it be that they just don't quite fit into our capitalistic system that those in power profit from? The answer lies within our history, and you realize this as we jump back in time for a moment to a year when the first American oil well was drilled in 1859. And as a result, we see the creation of one of the world's first oil barons, John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller successfully created an oil monopoly. He became one of the richest men in the world, and the rest is history, and sets the stage for the path that we would be on for the next 163 years. Dependence on oil, suppression of alternative energy sources, wars, and people in power that control the narrative to keep its dependence in place. There are more stories to tell regarding coal and other fossil fuels, but I think you get the big picture. So over a century ago, we had a profitable fossil fuel industry blossoming. And on the other side of the spectrum, there were scientists, physicists, and engineers who had a whole other focus. They were brilliant individuals who were discovering alternative ways to harness and create energy. And we touched on some of those ideas. However, they're worth elaborating on. Buckle your seatbelts. Because with that said, we take a journey into the past so we can have a closer look at some of the most notable alternative energy ideas that never had the recognition they deserved. Let's start this journey through history by highlighting the work of Nikola Tesla, whose ideas and research, if had been allowed to progress, could have changed the 20th and the 21st century as we know it. Most people would never know this, though, because Tesla was wrongfully pushed into the shadows of Thomas Edison when it comes to our history. Tesla began his work with etheric energy in the late 1800s, which included his plan to harness the energy that's located between the Earth and the upper atmosphere and convert it into usable electricity. Tesla sums it up perfectly himself when he says, quote, "This new power for the driving of the world's machinery will be derived from the energy which operates the universe, the cosmic energy, whose central source for the Earth is the sun, and which is everywhere present in unlimited quantities." Tesla had hundreds of energy-related patents, and one in particular, which pertains to etheric energy, was patented in the year 1901. It was labeled an apparatus for the utilization of radiant energy, and didn't require an external power supply to operate. It was simply powered by nature's invisible elements. With the etheric energy it pulled out of thin air, and while being grounded to the earth, his device was able to provide power to electrical devices. When describing his device, because he explains that it operates on radiant energy from the sun, it gives the impression that he's describing what we now call a solar panel. However, he goes on to state that it also utilized, quote, "other sources of radiant energy like cosmic rays." And perhaps the most important thing that he says about this technology, quote, "Night will not interrupt the flow of a new power supply. The disappearance of the sun below the horizon will not shut it off." So as you can see, Tesla's invention was similar but different from a traditional solar panel. Solar panels are made of expensive materials, are produced with silicon and other rare earth minerals that make them hard to get out of the ground and almost impossible to recycle. In contrast, Tesla's device used a simple insulated metal plate. But the biggest difference was the fact that it didn't stop working when the sun went down, which is one of the reasons solar panels of our time can't fulfill our energy needs. Not even close. They can really only supplement them, help a little bit. Tesla had intentions of developing and expanding on this invention, but because he didn't have the funds or the backing, and as you can imagine, the energy companies couldn't even allow the slightest possibility of his developments interfering with their already established and profitable energy system, it was never developed further. Okay, now I'm going to move over to one of Tesla's other energy projects for a bit, because I feel the story as a whole reveals a lot when it comes to how monopolies come into play when profit is concerned, as well as the government having their eye on things with their finger on the suppression button. And I'll begin by heading back to both the late 1800s and the early 1900s, the Gilded Age. Now at this time, Tesla researched, developed, and tested something that had the capability to create enormous amounts of energy that didn't need wires to travel. This was something he called a magnifying transmitter, which was an adaptation of his Tesla coil, and it utilized the Earth's electric force and atmospheric elements. With this technology, Tesla had a dream of providing free power to the world. He stated that he had the plans to create limitless power by harnessing, magnifying, and distributing the electrical energy located within the Earth. He felt that this could be done by tapping into stationary waves, the electricity created by the Earth's vibrations, allowing him to send energy through the Earth and the air. Now, he had plans to use his magnifying transmitter for telecommunications purposes by creating an electrical system that would be able to send light, voice, images, and power by using a wireless transmission system. Sounds a bit like an advanced version of the internet that didn't take off for almost another 100 years in the 1990s. Or even cell phone technology. Sound familiar? Well, a twist in the story, because telecommunications is what he was funded to do, but his main ambition was to provide the world with free power. Now, to do this, Tesla formulated that if a magnifying transmitter could be constructed at a large scale enough to send electricity through the ground and the atmosphere across a long distance, then a system of power-generating stations could be placed around the globe to distribute practically free wireless electricity anywhere in the world. He was so confident that this would work that he had a goal of lighting the 1902 Paris Exposition by shooting energy through the Earth and the atmosphere from his magnifying transmitter that would sit on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. The media, of course, caught news of his overall plan, and a newspaper reporter wrote, quote, "All monopolies that depend on power of any kind will come to a sudden stop. The Earth's currents of electricity are to be harnessed. Nature supplies them free of charge. The cost of power, of light, of heat will be practically nothing." Yes, exactly. This 120-year-old article goes on to mention, quote, "Tesla is a wizard who is going to emancipate modern industries from the shackles of corrupting, dividend-grabbing, monopolistic corporations." Well, sounds not much like a lot has changed when it comes to corporate greed and corruption, does it? I won't get into all of the mechanics of a magnifying transmitter system or a Tesla coil. I thought I would mention that those who have already heard of this technology may be under the impression that it creates energy entirely on its own. However, it must be hooked up to a power supply to start the process. Now, if you're thinking, what's the point of creating electricity with electricity? If we need a power supply, then what's the point? Well, the power supply needed is very small compared to the power that the device generates. Although we don't exactly know the input supply that was originally used in his Colorado experiments, it was said to be around 300 kilowatts. And with this, his transmitter could convert that small amount of energy into what experts have estimated to be 12 million volts, transforming the electrical energy provided into higher frequencies, shooting that energy through the Earth as if it were a giant transmission wire, as well as through the air, and producing 60-foot lightning bolts as a testament to its incredible power. It was during these experiments that he was able to illuminate a few hundred light bulbs that were miles away, wirelessly. Imagine doing something like this in the 1800s. When people saw this, they thought it was magic. Heck, if I saw it today, I'd think it was magic. Almost 150 years later, we're still not allowed to see it. After Tesla's successful experiments with his transmissions tower located in Colorado, he proceeded to take things to the next level. And by 1901, he built a full-scale 185-foot working model of this tower on Long Island, New York, which he named Wardenclyffe Tower. Now, this tower was made possible with the investment sum of $150,000 from J.P. Morgan Chase, who was interested in its wireless telecommunications possibilities, but not in Tesla's wireless free worldwide power goal, which Tesla did not mention to Chase when they made the deal. Whoops. However, after the tower was constructed, because of certain circumstances and the fact that he needed additional financing from Chase, Tesla decided to discuss his real plan with him, which was to provide free energy to the world, not just telecommunications. Chase then accused him of breaching their contract and communicated that he had no interest in investing his money to provide non-profitable free energy to anyone. You see, the truth was, Chase had a huge financial interest in copper wires. And Tesla's vision of a world without wires caused traditional energy lines to become obsolete. It would be a tremendous financial loss for Chase. Like I always say, follow the money if you want to know the real reason behind the suppression of anything. In the end, he ran out of money, owed back rent for his lab, which led him to losing his tower when someone else purchased it. Now, it's unknown if the government took control of that tower, but it just may have been because they ordered it to be torn down in 1917 in fear of German spies using it to send wireless messages during the war. More evidence of suppression is realized by the fact that an auction of all the contents of his Wardenclyffe lab was conducted by the sheriff's office, a department that's known for keeping complete records. However, historians were never able to find the records of the contents that were sold at the auction or the details on who the items were sold to. They all just disappeared. So was Chase or the government involved to ensure his research and work would totally vanish? In addition to this, smear campaigns started popping up in the newspapers that made Tesla appear to be a charlatan and incompetent. It's the very same playbook still used today to discredit opposition, plant fake stories in the media, and ruin their reputation. Something else that reveals a hint of a cover-up and further reveals just how legitimate Tesla's work was and that he was being taken seriously is the fact that the FBI and the OSS, later became known as the CIA, had such a keen interest in his research and his work. Why was the FBI and the OSS looking so closely at him? To the point where a government physicist, John G. Trump, was commissioned to take all of Tesla's belongings and bring them to the office of the alien property. Yes, he's the actual relative of Donald Trump. His belongings were held for years, and when released, many cases of research documents went missing. On top of this, it was later discovered that a young electrical engineer from MIT, who was a protege of Tesla that had gained through his trust access to his research, was, in reality, working for the U.S. Army and most likely positioned to spy on Tesla. Lastly, the hotel historian of the New Yorker hotel where Tesla passed away stated that they believe there were FBI agents staying on the very same floor as Tesla the week he died, ready to make their move because his life's research was included with all of his documents, and they were all sitting there in cases in his room. There was said to be over 80 cases. Well, because of the Freedom of Information Act, the FBI released to the public the documents they had on file, with many of them being heavily redacted. Why would the FBI have redacted documents on Tesla? What were they hiding? What are they still hiding more than 80 years later? And many of the documents are still missing to this day. Now it's time to switch gears and talk about another inventor who was on the same path as Tesla, Thomas Henry More, a respected engineer that held a PhD, was known for developing a radiant energy receiver that he called the More valve, similar to Tesla's radiant or etheric energy device, but more advanced. It had an antenna that was placed about 7 to 8 feet in the air, while a rod was driven into the ground, both connected to the device that contained various components. Once set up, it was capable of illuminating bulbs and powering various electrical items by pulling energy out of the atmosphere. More gave many demonstrations to dozens of people in the late 1920s, with several demonstrations purposely taking place 26 miles away from the closest power line and 100 miles from the closest radio station to show that the device was not somehow drawing power from those elements. Not only did his More valve generate electricity without any external power supply, but his device also ran for a full week uninterrupted. However, despite the many witnesses that testified to the success of the demonstrations, the patent office denied his application on the grounds that the main component was a non-heated vacuum tube, and during that time, tubes such as these had internal heaters, so therefore they said his device could not work with a cold vacuum tube. Really? He had verifiable proof that his device worked, and they denied it over a hot versus cold tube? Or is it possible the U.S. Patent Office instructs their caseworkers to deny or stall alternatives of free energy patents? The answer is yes, they do. If this sounds like a conspiracy theory, it's actually not. And here's the proof. The U.S. Patent Office had a secret program that could prevent inventions that were flagged from ever being granted a patent. It was called the Sensitive Application Warning System, referred to as SAWS. Most people don't know about this program that began in 1994 because it was intended to be kept secret. However, the program was revealed to the public through a leaked internal memo that was sent to a U.S. Patent Office manager that instructed them to remind their case examiners of the SAWS program guidelines. This program was designed to bring their attention to, quote, subject matter of a special interest. So which categories were threatening enough that they made it into this special list? Well, let's take a look at the leaked memo to find out. This is proof that the government is silencing and suppressing free energy. It's right here in their documents. Think about it. There were only a few categories on this list, and free energy was one of them. Free energy. Free energy patent suppression is real, and it can be taken as far as gag orders being placed on the inventor where they are ordered not to speak with anyone about their invention in any way, shape, or form. Those who don't honor the gag orders can be fined and placed in jail. So you create a device that harnesses free energy which could bring prosperity to millions of people to all corners of the earth. Instead, you're silenced and imprisoned if you speak about it. The Patent Office announced that they closed the program in 2015. But did they? Or did they just close it, create another secret internal program designed to weed out patents that threaten the system? I guess we'll never know, unless there's a whistleblower or another leaked memo. So with the tactics that the Patent Office is pulling, and because free energy concepts have been suppressed by various sources throughout history, we're not where we should be. And we're definitely not in a place where we can just flip the switch to fossil fuels to meet the world's energy needs. Even so, people somehow think we can just jump ahead of the game and provide power around the world with solar and wind. It's impossible. Sorry, we're not even close to having the infrastructure to do something like that right now. This conversation sums it up perfectly.
I'm all for all the technologies
dangerously
competing.
Delusional. Are you saying that you actually believe that we are going to power an entire planet of 9 billion people with wind and solar? Do you actually believe that?
I'm saying that I want the resources to compete against each other in the marketplace.
That's not the question. Do you actually believe that? Because if you don't believe that, you've got to support nuclear.
I think that renewable resources, wind and solar, have a lot more potential than nuclear because they are coming down in price.
He's right. How can you power that many people across vast lands with solar that doesn't work at night and wind turbines that don't work when the wind stops? Not to mention the battery technology. The largest battery farm sits in Escondido, California, but it can only store enough power for about 24,000 American homes for only about 4 hours. There are 134 million households in the United States. So in order for solar and wind to have enough battery systems in the United States, it would require over 75% of the land in the United States to be covered by battery farms. So take the United States and just put a giant battery building over 75% of the entire country. Can you imagine? I'm definitely all for clean, renewable alternative energy sources, but we're just not capable of providing that as our sole source of energy at this time. And you have the government and energy companies to thank for keeping us dependent on fossil fuels all of these years and driving nuclear power into the ground. Imagine for a moment if all of these technologies hadn't been suppressed but would have been allowed to progress over that 100 years. Technology that could have been so advanced had it not been swept under the rug. I want to show you a few examples. I'm going to start with solar panels. And if you remember, they were first installed in the 1800s, but it wasn't until about 90 years later that there was a push for solar technology development. And then it was years after this that they were even put to use. So we missed out on 90 to 100 years of advancement in this sector. If you can't envision how we could advance solar technology, then just look at this article from Forbes that sports the title, "Solar Power Stations in Space Could Supply the World with Limitless Energy," it says. It explains how solar technology can be used in outer space to transmit power back to Earth. A quote reads, "Above the Earth, there's no day and no night cycle and no clouds or weather or anything else that might obstruct the sun's rays, so a constant power source is available." And why did it take over 100 years to see this headline? Startup launches world's first long-range wireless power transmission. It says in the article that they developed a wireless power transmission as an alternative to existing copper line technology. Oh, where have we heard this before? Isn't this the same concept that was in development a century ago with Tesla's wireless transmission tower? And one of the biggest reasons it was halted was the threat of replacing profitable copper wires. I'm not sure the energy companies would be pleased to have their system replaced when they're making such record profits at this point, but I certainly hope the company can pull it off and finally push Tesla's dream into existence. And when it comes to converting elements in the atmosphere into energy, etheric energy, if this path were allowed to flourish and all of that information had been out there in the public eye over the last 100 years, imagine how many scientists could have worked on developing this concept. Like this one that was developed only a few years ago. It's called AirGen, and it was developed to create electrical currents from the water vapors naturally present in the atmosphere. One of the inventors, electrical engineer Jun Yao, was quoted as saying, "We're literally making electricity out of thin air. And the AirGen generates clean energy 24/7, he said. Now, the most interesting part, though, is that when he goes on to say the ultimate goal is to make large-scale systems. For example, the technology might be incorporated into wall paint that could help power your home. That's a really interesting idea, but it brings to light what a shame it is that we're now just touching on all of these advanced alternative energy ideas, wireless transmission of power, pulling energy from the air, and so on, as if they were all totally new concepts. But this is what happens when energy ideas are silenced throughout the course of history. Redacted. I guess I should say better late than never, right? Also with concepts such as placing energy technologies in wall paint and placing solar panels in space that beam down power to supply our energy needs, I'm actually looking forward to seeing what other innovative ideas pop up in this sector. Well, thank you so much for joining us and watching Redacted History. I hope this segment in our series has been an eye-opener for you as it has been for me, and how alternative energy sources have been silenced for more than 100 years. And I hope it gave you some food for thought, for contemplating the possibilities that could have been in our present day if this suppression had never taken place. Let us know in the comments below if you've heard of any other alternative energy concepts that are on the horizon. I read all your comments, and I'd be interested to find out what other information you have on this topic. We'll see you in the next Redacted History, or you can subscribe and join our daily live show here every day at 4 p.m. Eastern. We'll see you next time.